At 2:14 inches the morning, a black submarine longer than a football field slips away from the pier without a sound. No reporters are waiting. No cameras follow it. No politician gives a speech. Families stand beneath Orange Harbor lights, hugging husbands, wives, sons, and daughters goodbye, knowing they may not hear another word for months. The crew boards carrying backpacks, photographs, books, and the strange emotional weight of disappearing from the world on purpose. Above them, the harbor looks ordinary. Tugboats drift through cold water. Rain taps softly against steel railings. Sodium lights reflect across the surface in broken orange lines. But beneath the surface of that quiet departure sits one of the most destructive military systems ever built. Inside the submarine are nuclear missiles capable of reaching targets thousands of kilometers away in less than half an hour. Enough firepower to erase entire cities before most people even understand what is happening. And yet the submarine's greatest weapon is not the missile itself. It is uncertainty. Because once the vessel slides beneath the surface, nobody outside a tiny classified circle knows where it is anymore. Not the public, not foreign intelligence agencies, sometimes not even senior military commanders outside the nuclear chain of command. Somewhere above the Atlantic, satellites continue crossing overhead. Somewhere in Moscow and Beijing, analysts stare at oceans covering more than 70% of the planet, trying to solve the same impossible problem: find the submarine before it matters. But the ocean is dark, loud, layered, and enormous. Sound bends unpredictably underwater. Temperature layers distort sonar. Civilian shipping creates endless acoustic clutter. Storms shake entire sections of sea. Whales, drilling activity, underwater earthquakes, and thousands of commercial vessels create a constant wall of noise. Hidden somewhere beneath all of it, the submarine vanishes into silence. And that invisibility is not a side effect of the system. It is the system. Because modern nuclear deterrence does not actually depend on who can strike first. It depends on whether somebody can survive long enough to strike second. That single idea quietly shaped almost every major military doctrine of the Cold War and still shapes military planning today. Land-based missiles can be targeted because their positions are fixed. Strategic bombers can be tracked because they must take off from visible air bases. But ballistic missile submarines are different. They disappear before the war even starts. That changes enemy calculations in ways most people never think about. The real purpose of these submarines is not to fight wars. It is to prevent wars by creating uncertainty inside the mind of an adversary. If an enemy knows American submarines are still hidden somewhere beneath the ocean, then a surprise nuclear attack becomes suicidal. That is why the undersea leg of the nuclear triad became the backbone of deterrence. Not because submarines are flashy, not because they appear in headlines every day, but because they are survivable. And survivability is what keeps nuclear deterrence stable. Tonight, we are going beneath the surface into the silent world of ballistic missile submarines, undersea warfare, acoustic dominance, AI-driven sonar systems, underwater drones, and the growing technological arms race happening thousands of meters below the surface. This is Battletech Declassified. Modern Warfare Explained. The public usually imagines nuclear warfare as explosions, mushroom clouds, and missiles crossing the sky. Military planners think about something very different: timing, survivability, uncertainty. Because the first sign a deterrent system is collapsing is not destruction. It is fear that your weapons may not survive long enough to respond. That fear creates pressure, and pressure creates instability. During the Cold War, both the United States and the Soviet Union understood something terrifying. If either side believed its nuclear forces could be destroyed in a surprise first strike, then waiting became dangerous. Every radar alert would suddenly matter more. Every communication delay would feel suspicious. Military commanders would feel pressured to launch quickly before losing their own arsenal. This became known as the use it or lose it problem, and it pushed both superpowers toward a dangerous realization. Nuclear deterrence only works when both sides believe retaliation is unavoidable. That is why America built the nuclear triad: 3 separate ways to deliver nuclear weapons. Land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles buried in hardened silos, strategic bombers capable of carrying gravity bombs or cruise missiles, and ballistic missile submarines hidden beneath the oceans. Each leg solved a different strategic problem. Land-based missiles offered speed because they could launch within minutes, but their locations were fixed and targetable. Strategic bombers provided flexibility and visible signaling during crises, but airfields and tanker operations could still be monitored by satellites and radar systems. Submarines solved a different problem entirely. They removed predictability. They transformed the ocean itself into a hiding place. That is why ballistic missile submarines became the most survivable part of the triad, and eventually the most important. An Ohio-class submarine can remain underwater for months using a nuclear reactor that eliminates the need for refueling. It generates oxygen internally. It produces fresh water on board. The crew operates inside a sealed steel environment, isolated from the outside world, while the submarine moves silently through enormous sections of ocean. Somewhere below shifting thermal layers and violent currents, the vessel becomes one of the hardest military assets on Earth to locate consistently. And consistency matters more than occasional detection. Finding a submarine once is not enough. You must track it continuously. Lose contact for even a few hours, and the submarine can disappear into a completely different section of ocean. That survivability changed the entire logic of nuclear deterrence. Even if air bases were destroyed, even if missile silos were hit, even if command centers were attacked, the submarines would still remain somewhere beneath the surface, carrying enough destructive power to retaliate. That possibility alone forces caution inside enemy planning rooms. This is why the undersea leg of the triad became the ultimate insurance policy for American military strategy. But there is a growing problem beneath that stability. China and Russia are investing heavily in technologies designed to close the acoustic gap that once protected American submarines so effectively. AI-assisted sonar processing, autonomous underwater drones, seabed sensor networks, and quieter submarine designs are beginning to challenge assumptions that have shaped deterrence doctrine for decades. And if the oceans become more transparent in the future, the entire balance of nuclear survivability may begin to change with them. The Ohio-class ballistic missile submarine was never designed to look impressive above the surface. In fact, the less attention it attracts, the better. When people imagine military power, they usually picture aircraft carriers surrounded by escorts, stealth bombers flying through dark skies, or missile launches lighting up the horizon. Ballistic missile submarines operate in the opposite way. Their strength comes from being absent, hidden, quiet. An Ohio-class submarine stretches roughly 170 meters long and displaces thousands of tons underwater. Yet its entire mission depends on remaining unnoticed inside an environment that naturally wants to expose noise. Water carries sound extremely well. Tiny vibrations can travel enormous distances beneath the ocean's surface. A loose mechanical component, a cavitation bubble from a propeller, an improperly isolated pump, or even crew activity can create acoustic signatures detectable by enemy sonar systems. That is why modern submarine engineering became obsessed with silence. Machinery inside the submarine is mounted on vibration isolation systems. The hull is covered in sound-absorbing materials. Internal layouts are designed to minimize detectable noise. Propulsion systems are engineered specifically around acoustic reduction. Every detail exists for one reason: survive by remaining hidden. And inside that silent vessel sits one of the most destructive payloads ever carried by a military platform. 24 Trident II D5 ballistic missiles, each missile capable of traveling thousands of kilometers through space before re-entering the atmosphere at extreme speed. Each missile capable of carrying multiple independently targetable nuclear warheads. A single submarine carries more destructive potential than every bomb dropped during the Second World War combined. And yet the mission of the submarine is deeply paradoxical. It exists to never be used. That paradox sits at the center of nuclear deterrence doctrine. The submarine's job is not victory in the traditional sense. It is strategic certainty. Adversaries must always assume the submarine survived. That assumption alone shapes military calculations before conflict even begins. Somewhere beneath the Atlantic or Pacific, a ballistic missile submarine quietly patrols invisible routes for months at a time. The crew follows rigid operational procedures designed around secrecy and survivability. Communication with higher command is limited and carefully controlled. In some situations, the submarine may receive only fragments of information about global events while remaining submerged. Inside the vessel, life becomes repetitive and psychologically strange. Artificial lighting replaces sunlight. Narrow corridors create constant confinement. Time loses clarity because there is no natural day or night cycle. Yet despite the isolation, the crew understands the strategic weight of the mission. If deterrence fails, they may become the final surviving leg of American nuclear response. That awareness changes the emotional atmosphere on board. Every system check matters. Every navigation update matters. Every sound matters. Because the first sign a submarine is becoming vulnerable is usually acoustic. And once a submarine becomes trackable, deterrence itself begins weakening. That is why ballistic missile submarines became the foundation beneath American strategic stability for decades. But another transformation was quietly approaching beneath the surface. Military planners realized submarines could serve another purpose beyond nuclear deterrence, not just survivable retaliation, precision conventional warfare on a massive scale. And that realization would eventually create one of the strangest and most heavily armed underwater strike platforms ever built. At the end of the Cold War, the United States faced a strange strategic problem. It possessed ballistic missile submarines designed for large-scale nuclear conflict with the Soviet Union. But the geopolitical environment was changing rapidly. The Soviet Union collapsed. Nuclear tensions decreased compared to the terrifying peaks of the Cold War. Meanwhile, regional conflicts, counterterrorism operations, and precision strike campaigns became increasingly important. Military planners began asking an unusual question. What if some of these enormous submarines could be converted into conventional strike platforms instead of nuclear deterrence patrols? The answer eventually became the SSGN program. 4 Ohio-class submarines were transformed from ballistic missile carriers into guided missile submarines capable of launching overwhelming conventional attacks from almost anywhere on Earth. The conversion radically changed the role of the vessel, while preserving its most important advantage, stealth. Instead of carrying 24 Trident nuclear missiles, the submarines were modified to carry massive numbers of Tomahawk cruise missiles, up to 154 per submarine. Suddenly, a platform originally built for nuclear retaliation became one of the most powerful conventional strike assets ever created. And unlike aircraft carriers or bomber deployments, these submarines could position themselves quietly near conflict zones without attracting immediate political or military attention. Somewhere beneath the ocean surface, invisible and silent, sat enough conventional firepower to cripple air defense systems, command centers, radar sites, and critical infrastructure within minutes of receiving launch authorization. That capability fundamentally changed how the United States could project force. Cruise missile strikes no longer required obvious buildup periods that adversaries could monitor through satellites or intelligence networks. A guided missile submarine could already be nearby before tensions escalated publicly. And because Tomahawk missiles fly low and precisely, they became ideal for opening phases of military campaigns. During operations in the Middle East and elsewhere, cruise missile submarines allowed the United States to launch large precision attacks while minimizing immediate exposure of surface fleets or air assets. But the deeper strategic value was psychological. Adversaries could never fully know whether an SSGN was operating nearby. The submarine became a hidden launch platform embedded inside uncertainty itself. That invisibility created pressure inside enemy planning cycles. Air defense commanders had to assume missiles could appear with little warning. Naval forces had to assume they were being monitored from beneath the surface. Command structures had to account for strike possibilities even without visible escalation. Once again, survivability and uncertainty became the real weapon. But this also revealed something larger about undersea warfare. Control below the surface influences almost every layer of military power above it. Aircraft carriers depend on submarines screening ahead of them. Logistics routes depend on secure sea lanes. Communication cables crossing the ocean floor remain vulnerable to sabotage or surveillance. Ballistic missile submarines depend on hidden patrol areas remaining uncontested. The deeper military planners looked at undersea warfare, the clearer the conclusion became. Losing dominance beneath the surface could unravel military superiority everywhere else. And that realization would push the United States into an enormous long-term competition centered around something most people never see: acoustic dominance. Submarine warfare is often described as a cat-and-mouse game, but that comparison is actually too simple. Real undersea warfare feels less like a chase and more like two blindfolded hunters standing inside a storm trying to hear each other breathe first. The ocean is an extraordinarily hostile environment for detection. Sound behaves unpredictably underwater because temperature, salinity, depth, pressure, currents, and geography constantly affect how acoustic waves travel. In some situations, sound can travel enormous distances through underwater channels. In others, thermal layers bend and scatter acoustic energy in strange directions, creating hidden zones where submarines can temporarily disappear. Storms, commercial shipping, fishing activity, marine life, drilling operations, and even geological movement generate continuous background noise. That chaos creates opportunities for stealth. During the Cold War, the United States invested heavily in understanding these acoustic conditions better than anyone else. This became one of the foundations of American undersea dominance. Not just building quieter submarines, but mastering the science of hearing inside underwater chaos. Massive sonar networks, listening stations, patrol aircraft, attack submarines, and classified intelligence systems combined into a layered effort to track Soviet submarines across enormous sections of ocean. The most famous example was SOSUS, the Sound Surveillance System, a hidden network of underwater hydrophones capable of detecting submarine activity across strategic regions. Quietly, beneath public awareness, the United States turned parts of the ocean into giant listening fields. That acoustic superiority gave America enormous strategic advantages for decades. Soviet submarines were generally noisier than their American counterparts, making them easier to track. This allowed the United States to monitor patrol patterns, shadow submarines during crises, and maintain confidence in the survivability of its own ballistic missile fleet. But undersea dominance was never permanent. It depended on maintaining a technological edge in stealth, sonar processing, oceanographic understanding, and operational doctrine. And over time, rivals adapted. Russian submarine technology gradually improved after the Soviet collapse, despite severe economic struggles during the 1990s. China accelerated investment into naval modernization at extraordinary speed during the 21st century. New submarine classes became quieter, propulsion systems improved, acoustic signatures decreased. Meanwhile, computing power exploded. Modern sonar systems can process enormous quantities of acoustic data far faster than Cold War systems ever could. Artificial intelligence is beginning to assist analysts in identifying subtle patterns hidden inside underwater noise. Autonomous underwater drones can patrol areas continuously without exhausting human crews. Seabed sensor systems are becoming more sophisticated. Suddenly, the old assumption that submarines could always disappear safely into the ocean no longer feels guaranteed forever. And that uncertainty matters enormously because the entire logic of deterrence depends on survivability. If ballistic missile submarines become easier to track consistently, then adversaries may begin believing second strike capability is vulnerable. The moment that belief spreads inside military planning circles, strategic stability starts weakening. The frightening part is this: the public rarely notices any of these developments because almost all of them happen silently, underwater, far from headlines or visible battlefields. But beneath the surface, a technological arms race is accelerating, and the outcome may shape the future balance of military power more than most people realize. The first sign a submarine is being hunted is usually not visual. Nobody sees a periscope cutting through the water like in old war movies. Nobody hears dramatic alarms echoing through the hull. Real submarine tracking is quieter and far more psychological. It begins with fragments, a faint acoustic anomaly, a vibration pattern hidden inside ocean noise. A sonar operator noticing something that does not belong. Maybe it is a mechanical rhythm repeating too consistently to be natural. Maybe it is cavitation from a propeller at a certain speed. Maybe it is only a brief contact lasting seconds before disappearing again. But in undersea warfare, seconds matter. Because once a submarine reveals even a small piece of itself, modern tracking systems start building probabilities, and probabilities are dangerous. During the Cold War, American and Soviet submarines regularly played invisible games beneath the ocean's surface, shadowing each other for days or even weeks without public knowledge. Attack submarines quietly followed ballistic missile submarines, hoping to maintain acoustic contact while avoiding detection themselves. Sometimes crews knew they were being followed. Sometimes they only suspected it. That uncertainty created enormous stress, because the mission of a ballistic missile submarine depends completely on survivability. The moment a submarine becomes trackable, it becomes targetable. And if it becomes targetable, deterrence itself starts weakening. This is why submarine crews train obsessively around noise, discipline, and tactical unpredictability. Routes change constantly. Speeds vary. Depth adjustments are carefully calculated. The submarine uses the ocean itself as cover, hiding beneath thermal layers where sonar performance becomes less reliable. Entire patrol strategies revolve around avoiding predictability, because predictability is what tracking systems need most. But the ocean is becoming increasingly filled with sensors. That is the deeper problem now facing every major naval power. The Cold War environment was dangerous, but today's technological environment may eventually become even more difficult for submarines to survive inside. AI-assisted sonar systems can process massive acoustic datasets continuously without human fatigue. Underwater drones can patrol regions for weeks at a time, gathering environmental data and listening for anomalies. Satellite systems are improving their ability to monitor ocean surface disturbances. Seabed infrastructure is expanding in strategic choke points. Even commercial maritime activity creates huge oceans of data that intelligence agencies can analyze for unusual patterns. Individually, none of these technologies guarantee reliable submarine tracking. But combined together, they slowly reduce uncertainty. And reducing uncertainty is exactly what threatens deterrent stability. Because the undersea leg of the nuclear triad only works if adversaries remain unsure where those submarines are hiding. The moment technology creates confidence in persistent tracking, the strategic balance begins shifting in dangerous ways. This is why undersea warfare increasingly revolves around information dominance rather than simply torpedoes and missiles. The real battle is becoming a fight over detection itself. Who can remain hidden longest? Who can process acoustic information fastest? Who can create false signals? Who can poison the enemy's understanding of the underwater environment? In many ways, submarine warfare is becoming a war against perception, and the most important battlefield is not physical space. It is uncertainty inside the minds of military planners trying to calculate risks they can never fully measure. For decades, American submarine superiority depended heavily on something surprisingly simple. American submarines were usually quieter than their rivals. That acoustic advantage shaped enormous portions of Cold War strategy, even though most civilians never realized it existed. Noise is the enemy of survivability underwater. Every rotating component, every pump, every turbine vibration, every propeller disturbance creates signatures that sonar systems may detect across long distances under the right conditions. During the Cold War, Soviet submarines were often significantly noisier than American boats due to engineering limitations and industrial challenges. This gave the United States an enormous strategic edge because quieter submarines are harder to classify, harder to track, and easier to hide beneath complex ocean conditions. American attack submarines frequently shadowed Soviet ballistic missile submarines during patrols, sometimes staying close enough to monitor movements continuously. That capability created confidence inside American military planning. If Soviet submarines could be tracked more effectively, then the balance of survivability favored the United States. But strategic advantages rarely remain permanent. Over time, Russia improved quieting technologies dramatically. China studied both Russian and Western submarine design approaches while investing heavily in naval modernization. New submarine classes became more sophisticated, more automated, and significantly quieter than earlier generations. The acoustic gap started shrinking. And shrinking gaps create anxiety in military planning circles because the first sign a system is becoming vulnerable is not collapse, it is parity. That growing parity explains why modern undersea warfare increasingly focuses on networks instead of individual submarines alone. A submarine by itself is powerful, but survivability now depends on broader systems supporting stealth and situational awareness. Undersea sensor arrays, maritime patrol aircraft, satellites, attack submarines, intelligence fusion centers, and unmanned underwater vehicles all contribute to the larger underwater picture. The ocean is gradually transforming into an information battlefield layered with invisible surveillance architecture. At the same time, submarines themselves are becoming more networked and technologically advanced. Future submarine warfare may involve autonomous underwater drones operating alongside manned vessels, extending sensor reach far beyond traditional sonar capabilities. AI systems may help commanders interpret acoustic environments too complex for human analysts alone. Some military planners even worry about entirely new sensing technologies eventually reducing the ocean's protective opacity. Quantum sensing concepts, advanced magnetic anomaly systems, and persistent drone swarms are all being explored in classified programs around the world. Most of these technologies remain limited today. But deterrence planning is built around future risk, not just present capability. That is why undersea dominance matters so much to the United States. Losing control beneath the surface would not simply threaten submarines themselves. It could unravel carrier operations, logistics routes, communication cables, intelligence collection, and nuclear survivability all at once. The undersea domain quietly supports nearly every layer of American global military power. And because so much depends on hidden systems remaining hidden, the oceans are becoming one of the most strategically important battlegrounds of the 21st century. Even if almost nobody notices the war unfolding there. Inside a ballistic missile submarine, daily life feels strangely disconnected from the scale of the mission. Crew members still clean equipment, exercise in cramped compartments, study technical manuals, and eat meals under artificial lighting while machinery hums constantly through narrow steel corridors. Some sailors read books repeatedly because there is little else to break the psychological monotony of long patrols. Others memorize routines so deeply that days begin blending together into mechanical repetition. Time itself becomes distorted underwater because there is no natural sunlight cycle. Watches rotate continuously, sleep schedules shift, conversations become quieter over time as patrols continue. Yet beneath that routine sits a constant awareness that the submarine carries civilization-level destructive power. That contradiction shapes submarine culture in unusual ways. The crew must remain emotionally stable, technically disciplined, and psychologically calm while operating one of the most dangerous weapon systems ever created. Every checklist matters because mistakes underwater can escalate rapidly. Fires are catastrophic inside sealed compartments. Flooding threatens the entire vessel. Mechanical failures can expose acoustic signatures. And unlike surface ships, submarines cannot simply evacuate easily during emergencies. The ocean presses against the hull constantly with crushing pressure. Thousands of meters below the surface, survival depends entirely on engineering, discipline, and silence. That silence extends far beyond acoustics. Submarine operations are intentionally isolated from public attention because secrecy itself contributes to deterrence credibility. Patrol routes remain classified. Deployment timing remains classified. Operational procedures remain classified. Even after missions end, crews rarely discuss details publicly. This secrecy sometimes creates emotional distance between submarine crews and civilian society because the mission exists largely outside public visibility. Aircraft carriers appear in headlines. Fighter jets appear in recruitment commercials. Ballistic missile submarines mostly disappear into the ocean unnoticed, but invisibility is exactly what gives them strategic value. Adversaries must never feel certain they can neutralize the undersea deterrent. That uncertainty stabilizes nuclear doctrine in the background every single day, whether the public thinks about it or not. And this creates one of the strangest realities in modern military strategy. Some of the most important systems maintaining global strategic stability are almost entirely hidden from public consciousness. Somewhere beneath the ocean right now, ballistic missile submarines from multiple nuclear powers are silently patrolling with launch-ready weapons capable of ending millions of lives within minutes if deterrence collapses. Yet the overwhelming majority of people above the surface continue daily life without thinking about them at all. That disconnect is intentional because deterrence works best when the system remains stable, invisible, and predictable at the strategic level even while remaining tactically impossible to locate. But beneath that apparent stability, technological pressure is growing. The oceans are becoming louder with sensors, smarter with algorithms, and more dangerous for anything trying to remain hidden indefinitely. And military planners understand something deeply uncomfortable. The future of nuclear deterrence may depend less on missile range or warhead count, and more on whether submarines can continue disappearing inside an ocean that is slowly becoming easier to observe. If nuclear deterrence is the visible theory, attack submarines are the invisible enforcement mechanism beneath it. Ballistic missile submarines survive by hiding, but attack submarines survive by hunting. Their mission is fundamentally different. Instead of carrying nuclear missiles designed for retaliation, attack submarines specialize in tracking enemy submarines, protecting carrier groups, gathering intelligence, inserting special forces, monitoring undersea infrastructure, and if necessary, destroying hostile naval assets before conflict escalates further. During the Cold War, American attack submarines quietly followed Soviet submarines through some of the most dangerous underwater games ever played. Crews operated in near-total darkness beneath Arctic ice, through narrow choke points, and across deep ocean patrol routes where a single navigational error could cause catastrophic collision. In many cases, both submarines knew the other was nearby without fully confirming exact positions. That uncertainty created enormous psychological tension because submarine warfare rewards patience more than aggression. The side that reveals itself first often loses the advantage. Torpedoes are devastating underwater because escape options are limited and reaction times are compressed. Unlike aerial combat where pilots may visually track threats, submarines often fight using fragmented acoustic information, probability estimates, and incomplete situational awareness. The battlefield is invisible. Every sound matters. Every silence matters even more. That invisible contest still shapes modern naval doctrine today. American aircraft carriers, amphibious groups, logistics fleets, and ballistic missile submarines all depend heavily on attack submarines operating ahead of them beneath the surface. These submarines act as scouts, shields, and hunters simultaneously. They search for hostile submarines before those threats can approach more vulnerable strategic assets. And this is where undersea dominance becomes larger than submarines alone. Control below the surface affects everything above it. If hostile submarines can operate freely near carrier groups, maritime logistics become vulnerable. If communication cables crossing the seabed become exposed to sabotage, financial systems and military communications suffer. If ballistic missile submarines become easier to track, deterrent stability weakens. The undersea domain quietly supports global military projection in ways most people never see. That is why China's naval expansion worries American planners so deeply. China is not simply building ships. It is building layered anti-access systems designed to complicate American movement across the Pacific. Quieter submarines, long-range anti-ship missiles, seabed sensor networks, cyber warfare capabilities, and autonomous underwater systems all contribute to a broader strategy aimed at reducing American operational freedom. Russia follows similar logic in the Arctic and North Atlantic, where submarine routes remain strategically critical. The oceans are no longer uncontested spaces dominated automatically by American technological superiority. They are becoming heavily monitored zones filled with sensors, drones, acoustic analysis systems, and competing surveillance networks. And the more crowded the underwater environment becomes, the harder it may become for submarines to remain truly invisible forever. One of the strangest realities about submarine warfare is that geography still matters enormously despite all modern technology. Oceans may look empty on maps, but beneath the surface they are filled with choke points, thermal layers, undersea ridges, narrow passages, and predictable transit routes that shape naval strategy in powerful ways. During the Cold War, both NATO and Soviet planners focused heavily on specific maritime regions because submarines moving between oceans often had to pass through limited areas where tracking became easier. The GIUK gap, stretching between Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom, became one of the most strategically important underwater corridors on Earth. Soviet submarines leaving northern bases frequently crossed through this region to access the Atlantic, making it a natural monitoring zone for NATO anti-submarine forces. Patrol aircraft, attack submarines, sonar arrays, and surface ships concentrated heavily around these waters because geography compressed movement into more predictable patterns. The same logic applies today in parts of the Pacific, where island chains, shallow seas, and contested maritime regions shape Chinese and American submarine operations. The ocean is vast, but strategic movement often narrows into specific underwater highways, and wherever movement becomes predictable, survivability decreases. That is why modern submarine doctrine places enormous emphasis on operational unpredictability. Routes change constantly. Patrol zones remain classified. Timing varies intentionally. Ballistic missile submarines especially avoid predictable patterns because predictability creates tracking opportunities over time. This challenge becomes even more dangerous in shallow water environments where sonar conditions are complicated by seabed reflections, civilian traffic, fishing activity, and coastal noise. Ironically, shallow water can sometimes become more dangerous than deep ocean because acoustic clutter creates both concealment opportunities and detection confusion simultaneously. Modern undersea warfare increasingly resembles a giant information puzzle where every side tries to reduce uncertainty while increasing uncertainty for the opponent. AI-assisted systems now help process acoustic signatures faster than human analysts alone ever could. Autonomous underwater drones can patrol narrow choke points continuously without crew fatigue. Seabed sensors can monitor strategic regions for long periods while remaining difficult to detect themselves. Even commercial maritime traffic contributes useful data patterns for intelligence agencies studying unusual activity. Gradually, oceans are becoming more transparent from an information perspective. Not fully transparent yet, but less opaque than during earlier decades. And that trend creates long-term strategic anxiety because ballistic missile submarines depend on opacity for survival. If future technologies eventually allow persistent tracking of submarines across large distances, then the undersea leg of the nuclear triad could become less stable than military planners assumed for generations. That possibility is exactly why undersea warfare remains one of the highest priority areas for military investment among major powers today, because beneath all the silence and secrecy lies a terrifying strategic truth. The survivability of submarines may ultimately determine whether nuclear deterrence remains credible in the future. The terrifying thing about ballistic missile submarines is not how often they launch weapons, it is how rarely they need to. Deterrence works through expectation. Adversaries do not need visual proof of a submarine's location because the uncertainty itself changes behavior. Somewhere beneath the ocean, hidden and survivable, the submarine represents unavoidable retaliation. That possibility shapes diplomacy, military planning, escalation management, and even political rhetoric during crises. This is why ballistic missile submarines are sometimes described as the ultimate second strike weapon. Their purpose is not rapid aggression. Their purpose is ensuring no enemy believes it can escape retaliation after launching a nuclear attack first. During the Cold War, this logic became deeply embedded inside strategic doctrine on both sides. If both powers knew retaliation was guaranteed, then initiating nuclear war became irrational. That fragile logic helped prevent direct superpower conflict for decades despite enormous geopolitical tension. But deterrent stability depends heavily on confidence. Confidence that communication systems work. Confidence that command structures survive. Confidence that submarines remain hidden and operational. Once confidence begins weakening, strategic pressure increases rapidly. And confidence is exactly what emerging technologies are beginning to challenge. Modern militaries are increasingly obsessed with information dominance because information reduces uncertainty. AI systems can process enormous acoustic data sets faster than human analysts. Underwater drones can search regions continuously for anomalies. Satellite systems are improving maritime surveillance capabilities. Cyber warfare threatens communication infrastructure supporting naval operations. Some researchers are even exploring entirely new sensing methods capable of detecting subtle environmental disturbances caused by submarines moving beneath the surface. Most of these technologies remain imperfect today, but military planning always looks ahead decades into the future. That is why American undersea strategy increasingly focuses not just on building better submarines, but on preserving uncertainty itself. Quieter propulsion systems, improved stealth coatings, advanced decoys, distributed sensor networks, autonomous support drones, and AI-assisted tactical analysis all aim to maintain survivability inside a rapidly evolving technological environment. Because if adversaries ever believe ballistic missile submarines can be reliably tracked, the logic of deterrence begins changing dangerously. Suddenly, military planners may feel pressure to strike earlier during crises before submarines are neutralized. Escalation timelines shrink, fear increases, miscalculation becomes more likely. The frightening part is that none of this requires actual war to become dangerous. The instability begins long before missiles launch. It begins the moment strategic confidence starts eroding beneath the surface. And that is why the silent competition happening underwater today matters far more than most people realize. The Cold War created a strange form of peace built entirely on the threat of catastrophic destruction. That contradiction shaped generations of military doctrine. Both the United States and the Soviet Union understood that nuclear war could not produce meaningful victory because retaliation would survive long enough to devastate both sides. But survivability was never distributed equally across every system. Missile silos could be mapped, air bases could be targeted, communication nodes could be disrupted. Submarines were different because oceans naturally create uncertainty. That uncertainty became the foundation beneath strategic stability. Yet maintaining that stability required enormous technological investment. American naval planners understood early that ballistic missile submarines were only as survivable as the acoustic environment allowed them to be. Quiet submarines alone were not enough. The United States needed entire ecosystems supporting undersea invisibility. Attack submarines hunted hostile boats before they could approach strategic patrol areas. Maritime patrol aircraft scanned huge sections of ocean searching for unusual activity. Intelligence systems analyzed acoustic signatures collected across years of surveillance. Oceanographic research mapped temperature layers, salinity conditions, and sound propagation characteristics in extraordinary detail. Undersea warfare became a giant invisible science project, driven by physics, computing, engineering, and strategic paranoia. And because the stakes involved nuclear deterrence, no military planner could afford complacency. That same paranoia is returning now in a new form as China and Russia accelerate investment into advanced undersea systems. China especially understands that challenging American military dominance in the Pacific requires contesting the undersea domain. Aircraft carriers attract attention because they are visible symbols of power, but submarines shape the hidden balance underneath regional strategy. Chinese naval modernization increasingly focuses on layered anti-access capabilities designed to complicate American operations near contested regions like Taiwan and the South China Sea. Long-range anti-ship missiles threaten surface fleets. Cyber warfare threatens communications. Space assets become vulnerable to disruption. Beneath all of it, quieter submarines and expanding sensor networks aim to make the Pacific more dangerous for American naval movement. Russia pursues similar goals in the Arctic and North Atlantic, where strategic submarine routes remain critically important. The result is a new undersea arms race happening mostly outside public awareness. Unlike fighter jets or hypersonic missiles, submarine competition rarely produces dramatic footage for headlines. Most of the struggle happens silently through classified patrols, acoustic data collection, AI-assisted sonar analysis, autonomous underwater drone development, and seabed infrastructure expansion. But the consequences are enormous because the undersea domain quietly supports the survivability of nuclear deterrence itself. The moment submarines stop feeling invisible, strategic stability begins weakening. And once stability weakens, military planning starts becoming more dangerous long before any actual conflict begins. The ocean floor is no longer just geography. Increasingly, it is infrastructure. That transformation changes undersea warfare dramatically because modern civilization depends heavily on systems hidden beneath the surface. Fiber optic communication cables carry enormous portions of global internet traffic across oceans. Financial transactions, military communications, intelligence sharing, commercial logistics, and digital infrastructure all rely on networks stretching thousands of kilometers along the seabed. Energy pipelines cross underwater regions connecting economies together. Sensor systems monitor strategic maritime zones quietly and continuously. During peacetime, most people never think about these systems because they are invisible. But military planners think about them constantly because infrastructure creates vulnerability. A submarine does not necessarily need to launch missiles to influence global stability. Sometimes surveillance alone matters. Sometimes sabotage matters. Sometimes simply positioning near critical infrastructure changes strategic calculations. This is why modern undersea warfare increasingly extends beyond traditional naval combat. The battlefield now includes information systems, communication architecture, seabed mapping, autonomous drones, and intelligence collection against underwater infrastructure itself. The ocean has become a hidden layer of global strategic competition, where visibility is limited and attribution becomes difficult. That ambiguity creates enormous strategic complications during crises. If an undersea cable suddenly fails, was it an accident or sabotage? If a seabed sensor network stops functioning, was it mechanical failure or hostile interference? If autonomous underwater drones appear near critical maritime infrastructure, who deployed them and why? Underwater environments naturally complicate verification because evidence is difficult to collect quickly. This creates opportunities for covert pressure and gray zone operations below the threshold of open warfare. Russia has already attracted attention for submarine activities near undersea cable routes in the Atlantic. China continues expanding underwater capabilities throughout the Pacific. Meanwhile, the United States is increasing investment into seabed awareness technologies precisely because protecting undersea infrastructure is becoming strategically essential. Once again, survivability and uncertainty remain central themes. The side capable of protecting its hidden systems while threatening the opponent's hidden systems gains enormous leverage. And because so much global infrastructure now depends on undersea networks, submarine warfare increasingly influences civilian life in ways most people never notice. The frightening part is that modern societies remain heavily dependent on systems that are physically difficult to defend across vast ocean distances. Underwater cables cannot simply be surrounded by visible security everywhere simultaneously. Seabed infrastructure stretches across enormous areas where monitoring remains difficult and expensive. That reality creates strategic pressure for all major powers to expand undersea surveillance capabilities even further. And every new sensor, drone, and AI-assisted detection network gradually contributes to the same long-term trend. The oceans are slowly becoming less mysterious than they used to be. #0. 5. Hash is greater than. For most of human history, the ocean protected secrecy naturally. Ships vanished beyond the horizon and disappeared for weeks or months without reliable tracking. Submarines pushed that invisibility to an entirely different level because they removed even the limited visibility surface vessels still possessed. But technology keeps attacking opacity. Radar reduced the safety of distance in the 20th century. Satellites reduced the safety of geography. Digital networks reduced the safety of information isolation. Now, artificial intelligence and autonomous sensing systems are beginning to challenge the safety of underwater invisibility itself. This does not mean submarines are suddenly obsolete. Far from it. Modern submarines remain extraordinarily difficult to track consistently. But military planners worry less about present capability and more about future trajectories. The concern is cumulative. Each new sensor system, acoustic processing improvement, satellite enhancement, autonomous drone platform, or machine learning breakthrough reduces uncertainty slightly. No single technology solves the submarine problem alone, but together, over decades, they may slowly shift the balance between hiding and finding. And the entire logic of nuclear deterrence depends heavily on hiding remaining easier than finding. That is why the future of undersea warfare increasingly revolves around information competition instead of raw firepower alone. The next major naval advantage may belong not simply to the side with the most submarines, but to the side capable of managing uncertainty better than everyone else. That includes acoustic deception, decoy deployment, distributed sensor networks, AI-enhanced tactical analysis, autonomous underwater support systems, and cyber resilience for naval communications. Future submarines may operate alongside fleets of unmanned underwater drones, extending sensor coverage while confusing enemy tracking efforts simultaneously. Some military planners envision oceans filled with persistent autonomous surveillance systems, constantly mapping acoustic conditions in real time. Others worry that quantum sensing technologies could eventually reduce the effectiveness of traditional stealth approaches. Most of these concepts remain developmental today, but strategic planning always moves ahead of public awareness. The uncomfortable truth is that the future balance of military power may depend heavily on who adapts fastest beneath the surface, long before most civilians understand what changed. Because undersea dominance quietly supports almost every other layer of military capability above it, aircraft carriers require secure underwater environments, ballistic missile submarines require hidden patrol zones, communication infrastructure requires seabed protection, logistics routes require survivable maritime movement. Lose the undersea domain, and every other layer of military power becomes more vulnerable. That is why the silent race happening underwater matters so much, even if almost nobody sees it happening in real time. Return for a moment to that submarine leaving port in darkness at the beginning of this episode. Somewhere beneath the ocean right now, vessels exactly like it are still moving silently through enormous patrol areas. Their crews continue rotating watches beneath artificial lighting, while nuclear missiles remain secured inside launch tubes waiting for orders everyone hopes never arrive. The submarine may pass beneath storms, powerful enough to shake surface fleets violently, while remaining hidden in relative calm below. It may cross entire oceans without anyone outside classified command structures knowing its exact location. Enemy intelligence agencies continue searching, satellites continue scanning. Sonar networks continue listening. Autonomous systems continue gathering acoustic data. Yet the submarine survives by remaining uncertain inside all that noise. And that uncertainty may still be the single most important stabilizing factor, preventing catastrophic escalation between nuclear powers. Because as long as adversaries believe retaliation cannot be eliminated completely, caution survives inside strategic decision-making. But the deeper truth is this: the entire system depends on assumptions about invisibility that technology is beginning to challenge slowly over time. AI-driven sonar analysis, autonomous underwater drones, seabed surveillance systems, advanced computing, and expanding sensor networks are all reducing opacity beneath the surface little by little. Maybe not enough to destroy submarine survivability today, but enough to worry military planners thinking decades ahead. The first sign a deterrent system is weakening is not explosions. It is doubt. Doubt that submarines remain hidden. Doubt that second strike capability survives. Doubt that retaliation is still guaranteed under future technological conditions. And once doubt enters strategic planning, escalation pressure quietly increases beneath the surface long before conflict begins openly. That is why undersea dominance remains one of the most important military priorities on Earth, despite receiving relatively little public attention. The oceans are no longer passive geography separating continents. They are active strategic terrain shaping nuclear stability, global communications, logistics, intelligence operations, and the future balance of military power itself. The most powerful weapon America possesses may still be the one hidden silently beneath the ocean carrying missiles it was designed never to fire. But other powers understand that lesson too. China is expanding submarine capabilities aggressively. Russia continues prioritizing strategic undersea forces. American allies across the Pacific are now reconsidering their own underwater deterrent strategies as regional tensions grow. And next time, we go deeper into that transformation. Because America is no longer the only nation betting its future security on invisible submarines beneath the sea. Australia spent decades relying heavily on distance for security. Oceans separated the continent from most major military threats, and American naval dominance across the Pacific reinforced the assumption that large-scale conflict would remain far away from Australian shores. But strategic geography is changing faster than many governments expected. Long-range missiles compress distance. Cyber warfare ignores geography entirely. Autonomous systems expand surveillance reach across oceans once considered protective barriers. Most importantly, China's rapid military modernization is transforming the Indo Pacific into a far more contested environment than it was 20 years ago. That shift explains why submarines suddenly became central to strategic conversations among American allies throughout the Pacific. Australia's AUKUS agreement with the United States and the United Kingdom is not simply about acquiring expensive submarines. It is about survivability. Nuclear-powered submarines offer range, endurance, stealth, and operational flexibility impossible to replicate with conventional diesel-electric fleets alone. They allow a middle power like Australia to operate across enormous ocean distances while remaining difficult to detect. And in a future conflict shaped by surveillance systems, missile saturation, and anti-access strategies, survivability matters more than visibility. Once again, the logic returns to the same principle shaping American nuclear doctrine for generations. Hidden forces create uncertainty. Uncertainty complicates enemy planning. Complicated planning slows escalation and raises operational risk. That strategic logic is spreading throughout the Indo-Pacific because regional powers increasingly understand the oceans are becoming the primary arena for future military competition. Japan continues expanding anti-submarine warfare capabilities aggressively. India invests heavily in both ballistic missile submarines and attack submarines as it monitors Chinese naval activity throughout the Indian Ocean. South Korea explores advanced submarine technologies while balancing regional tensions involving both China and North Korea. Across the Pacific, military planners are quietly converging around the same conclusion. Undersea survivability may become one of the most valuable strategic assets in a future defined by sensors, missiles, and information warfare. The irony is striking. As the world becomes more connected and observable through satellites, drones, and digital surveillance, the ocean remains one of the few environments where uncertainty still survives at scale. That makes submarines uniquely valuable in an age increasingly obsessed with total visibility. But maintaining that invisibility becomes harder every year. Which means future submarine warfare may depend not only on building quieter vessels, but on shaping entire underwater ecosystems favorable to stealth, sensor denial, acoustic deception, AI-assisted maneuvering, autonomous decoys, information warfare beneath the surface. The future of naval power may increasingly revolve around who can preserve uncertainty longest inside oceans, becoming progressively more transparent. The Pacific Ocean is so large that maps distort human intuition about it. Distances stretch across thousands of kilometers between island chains, naval bases, and maritime choke points. Logistics become brutally difficult across such enormous spaces. Aircraft require tanker support, surface fleets require fuel, maintenance, escorts, and predictable movement patterns. Submarines operate differently. Nuclear-powered submarines can remain submerged for months while traveling quietly across vast ocean areas without requiring vulnerable supply chains above the surface. That endurance makes them uniquely valuable inside a future Pacific conflict scenario where long-range missile systems threaten traditional naval concentration. Military planners increasingly worry about what happens when large visible platforms become easier to target. Aircraft carriers remain extremely powerful, but they also generate massive signatures detectable across multiple domains. Satellites track movement. Radar systems monitor activity. Signals intelligence analyzes communications. Ballistic missile submarines and attack submarines exist on the opposite side of that equation. They survive by minimizing exposure rather than dominating visibility. In a military environment shaped by precision strike systems and persistent surveillance, hidden survivable assets become more strategically important than ever. That reality explains why undersea warfare is becoming central to future American military planning in the Pacific. China's anti-access strategy depends heavily on pushing American surface forces farther away from contested regions during crises. Long-range missiles, integrated air defenses, cyber warfare systems, and maritime surveillance networks all contribute to that effort. But submarines complicate those calculations because they remain difficult to locate reliably across enormous ocean spaces. American attack submarines can threaten naval forces, monitor choke points, gather intelligence, and support carrier operations while remaining hidden beneath the surface. Ballistic missile submarines continue maintaining nuclear survivability quietly in the background. At the same time, China is attempting to strengthen its own undersea capabilities rapidly. New submarine classes, expanding naval infrastructure, AI-assisted surveillance systems, and autonomous underwater technologies all support long-term ambitions for greater regional control beneath the surface. This is not simply a naval arms race anymore. It is a competition over invisibility itself. Who can remain hidden longest? Who can find hidden threats fastest? Who can maintain operational uncertainty while reducing uncertainty for the opponent? In many ways, future great power competition may depend less on dramatic fleet battles and more on silent struggles over information dominance beneath the ocean surface. Because the side controlling uncertainty controls escalation pressure, and the side controlling escalation pressure shapes the entire strategic environment before the first missile ever launches. Submarine commanders often describe the ocean as both protection and prison at the same time. Water hides the submarine from detection, but it also isolates the crew completely from the outside world. Once submerged deeply, communication becomes extremely limited because radio waves struggle to penetrate seawater effectively. Ballistic missile submarines therefore operate under strict communication doctrines, balancing survivability against command reliability. Too much communication risks revealing position through detectable transmissions. Too little communication creates uncertainty about strategic developments above the surface. During patrols, crews may know only fragments of world events, while continuing missions carrying civilization-level consequences. That psychological isolation shapes submarine culture deeply. Discipline becomes essential because emotional instability inside a sealed underwater environment can spread quickly through crews living in extremely confined spaces for months. Routine becomes survival. Training becomes survival. Silence becomes survival. Every mechanical sound is monitored carefully because acoustic discipline matters constantly. Even small mistakes can generate signatures exploitable by enemy sonar systems. Submarine warfare therefore rewards patience and precision more than dramatic aggression. The best submarine operations are often the ones nobody ever notices happened at all. This hidden nature creates an unusual disconnect between submarine warfare and public perception. Popular culture often portrays naval conflict through visible explosions, dramatic missile launches, and cinematic battles above the surface. Real undersea competition usually looks invisible from the outside. Data analysis, acoustic mapping, sensor deployment, silent tracking operations lasting days without confrontation, autonomous drones collecting environmental information, intelligence agencies comparing acoustic signatures gathered across years of patrol activity, AI systems searching for anomalies hidden inside oceans of noise. Yet despite this quiet appearance, undersea warfare remains one of the most dangerous military domains on Earth because so much strategic stability depends on it functioning correctly. Ballistic missile submarines support nuclear deterrence. Attack submarines protect carrier groups and maritime logistics. Undersea infrastructure carries global communications. Seabed sensors support surveillance networks. Everything beneath the surface connects upward into larger systems, shaping global military balance. That is why major powers continue investing enormous resources into submarine modernization despite rising costs and technological complexity. The ocean remains one of the last environments where true operational invisibility still exists at meaningful scale. But maintaining that invisibility grows harder every year as technology advances relentlessly. And the frightening part is that strategic instability may emerge gradually, long before the public fully realizes what changed beneath the surface. Artificial intelligence is beginning to change submarine warfare in ways remarkably similar to how it is changing aerial warfare and cyber operations. Not through dramatic robot submarines replacing human crews overnight, but through information processing. Underwater environments generate overwhelming amounts of acoustic data continuously. Sonar systems collect enormous streams of sound signatures from commercial ships, marine life, geological activity, weather effects, machinery vibrations, and potential submarine contacts. Human analysts remain extremely skilled at interpreting complex acoustic patterns, but humans fatigue over time and struggle processing huge datasets continuously without error. AI systems excel at pattern recognition across large quantities of information. That creates major opportunities for submarine detection and tracking. Machine learning systems can compare acoustic signatures against historical databases rapidly, identify subtle anomalies, and highlight contacts that human operators might miss during long operations. Autonomous underwater drones equipped with advanced sensors can gather acoustic information persistently across regions without requiring crews on board. Over time, these systems may create increasingly detailed acoustic maps of ocean environments, and detailed maps reduce uncertainty. That reduction in uncertainty is exactly what worries strategic planners focused on nuclear deterrence survivability. Ballistic missile submarines depend on remaining hidden inside noisy, unpredictable underwater conditions. If AI-assisted systems eventually make persistent tracking more reliable, then the logic underpinning second strike capability becomes more fragile. This does not mean submarines suddenly become obsolete tomorrow. Oceans remain extraordinarily difficult environments for surveillance. Acoustic conditions constantly change. Tracking still requires continuity, not occasional detection. Decoys, maneuvering, environmental complexity, and operational unpredictability all continue favoring stealth significantly. But military planning revolves around future trajectories rather than present certainty. Every technological improvement in sensor processing, autonomous operations, underwater communications, or distributed surveillance networks pushes the balance slightly toward detection. That is why modern submarine strategy increasingly includes counter-information warfare approaches, acoustic deception, false signatures, autonomous decoy systems, AI-assisted stealth routing, cyber attacks targeting enemy sensor networks. The future battle beneath the ocean may revolve less around torpedoes and more around competing algorithms trying to interpret fragmented underwater reality faster than the opponent. In that sense, submarine warfare is evolving into something broader than naval combat alone. It is becoming a contest over perception itself. And perception shapes deterrence, escalation, and strategic confidence long before actual weapons are fired. There is another uncomfortable reality beneath modern submarine strategy. Human beings remain the weakest and strongest part of the system simultaneously. Technology matters enormously in undersea warfare, but crews still make critical decisions under pressure inside environments where information is incomplete and mistakes can become catastrophic very quickly. Sonar operators interpret uncertain contacts, commanders decide whether signals are threats or noise, engineers manage reactors and propulsion systems under immense responsibility. During crises, submarine crews may operate with fragmented intelligence while carrying weapons capable of changing history permanently. That human element creates strategic unpredictability because deterrent systems are ultimately operated by people under stress, not machines alone. During the Cold War, several incidents nearly escalated dangerously because individuals inside military systems interpreted situations cautiously rather than aggressively. Human judgment prevented catastrophe more than once, but future warfare may compress decision timelines significantly through automation, AI-assisted targeting, cyber disruptions, and faster sensor fusion. The battlefield is becoming increasingly fast, and the bottleneck is often the human. That phrase matters deeply for future undersea warfare, because submarines already operate inside compressed information environments. Communication delays, uncertain contacts, acoustic ambiguity, and strategic pressure create conditions where decision-making becomes psychologically intense. Add AI-assisted systems capable of processing information faster than humans naturally can, and future commanders may feel pressure to trust machine recommendations increasingly during crises. This creates difficult questions. Military planners are only beginning to confront seriously. How much autonomy should underwater systems possess? How quickly should AI-assisted tactical recommendations influence escalation decisions? What happens if cyber attacks manipulate acoustic information or sensor feeds during confrontation? The first sign a system is collapsing is often confusion, not destruction. And undersea warfare naturally amplifies confusion because the environment itself obscures certainty. That is why survivability remains more important than raw firepower beneath the surface. A stable deterrence system depends on maintaining confidence even under uncertainty. The challenge for the future is preserving that confidence, while technology simultaneously accelerates detection, processing, and autonomous decision-making across every military domain. Somewhere beneath the ocean tonight, ballistic missile submarines continue their silent patrols carrying weapons they were built never to launch. Their survival still anchors strategic stability for multiple nuclear powers. But whether future technology preserves that invisibility or slowly erodes it may become one of the most important military questions of the 21st century. The strange irony of submarine warfare is that success usually looks like nothing happening at all. No explosions, no dramatic fleet battles, no visible victories for public audiences to celebrate. A successful ballistic missile submarine patrol means deterrence held. A successful attack submarine mission often means intelligence was gathered quietly, without escalation. A successful anti-submarine operation may remain classified for decades if it is ever revealed publicly at all. Undersea warfare therefore exists in a world where invisibility and silence become strategic achievements by themselves. That makes it fundamentally different from many other military domains built around visible demonstrations of force. Aircraft carriers project power openly. Fighter aircraft appear in airshows and propaganda footage. Ballistic missile submarines disappear into darkness specifically so nobody can measure their exact location or operational status confidently. And that uncertainty is what keeps deterrence credible. Because the moment an adversary feels certain it can neutralize those submarines, the balance begins shifting dangerously toward instability. This is why the oceans matter far more than most civilians realize. Beneath the surface sits an invisible structure supporting global military balance quietly every day. Submarines maintain second-strike survivability. Attack submarines protect fleets and patrol strategic choke points. Undersea infrastructure carries communications and financial systems. Sensor networks monitor maritime movement continuously. AI systems increasingly process underwater information faster than human analysts alone. The undersea domain has become a hidden layer of global competition where strategic pressure builds silently beneath public awareness. And the terrifying part is this. Most of the systems maintaining deterrent stability were designed during a technological era where oceans were far more opaque than they are becoming today. Artificial intelligence, autonomous drones, advanced sonar processing, seabed surveillance systems, and persistent sensor networks are gradually changing the balance between hiding and finding. Not completely yet, but enough that military planners are preparing aggressively for futures where invisibility becomes harder to maintain. Because the side capable of preserving uncertainty longest may shape the future balance of military power itself. And somewhere tonight, beneath thousands of meters of cold black ocean, submarines continue moving silently through darkness, carrying weapons humanity hopes will never need to prove whether deterrence still works. Aircraft carriers dominate headlines because they are visible symbols of military power. They look powerful on camera. Fighter jets launch dramatically from enormous decks, while destroyers escort them across open water. But visibility creates vulnerability. Modern surveillance systems track large surface fleets far more easily than hidden submarines beneath the ocean. Satellites monitor movement patterns continuously. Long-range missiles threaten concentrated formations from hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away. Drones extend reconnaissance reach constantly. Anti-ship ballistic missiles compress reaction timelines dramatically. That changing environment is forcing military planners to rethink how survivability works at sea. Aircraft carriers remain extremely important, but future naval warfare increasingly depends on distributed survivable systems operating across multiple domains simultaneously. And submarines fit that future remarkably well because they survive through concealment rather than exposure. A submarine does not need to dominate the horizon visually. It only needs to remain hidden long enough to influence enemy calculations. That makes undersea warfare uniquely valuable inside an age where visibility itself can become dangerous. This does not mean carriers are obsolete. Far from it. Carriers still provide unmatched flexibility for sustained air operations, crisis response, logistics coordination, and regional presence. But modern doctrine increasingly assumes carriers cannot operate alone safely near heavily defended contested regions without extensive support. Attack submarines now play critical roles, screening ahead of carrier groups searching for hostile submarines and gathering intelligence beneath the surface. Ballistic missile submarines quietly preserve nuclear survivability in the background. Undersea sensor networks contribute situational awareness impossible to generate through satellites alone. The ocean is becoming a layered battlefield, where surface dominance depends heavily on invisible undersea conditions remaining favorable. China understands this deeply. That is why Chinese military modernization focuses heavily on anti-access systems designed to complicate American naval operations across the Pacific. Long-range missile systems threaten surface fleets directly, while submarines and underwater surveillance systems pressure the undersea environment simultaneously. The result is a strategic competition, where survivability matters more than concentration. Smaller distributed systems, autonomous drones, stealthy submarines, and resilient sensor networks increasingly shape future doctrine more than giant concentrated formations alone. And beneath all of it remains the same core strategic question: who can survive long enough to maintain operational freedom when detection becomes easier everywhere else? Increasingly, the answer points back beneath the ocean surface. Autonomous underwater vehicles are quietly transforming submarine warfare, the same way drones transformed aerial warfare over the last 2 decades. At first, these systems mainly performed limited reconnaissance and environmental monitoring tasks, but modern underwater drones are becoming far more sophisticated. Some can patrol strategic areas for long durations, gathering acoustic information continuously. Others can map seabed infrastructure in extraordinary detail. Some are designed to support anti-submarine warfare by extending sensor coverage across regions too large for traditional manned operations alone. Future systems may even operate cooperatively in swarms, sharing information autonomously beneath the surface. This creates enormous opportunities for surveillance because underwater drones do not suffer from crew fatigue, psychological stress, or many logistical limitations affecting human-operated submarines. They can remain persistent, quiet, disposable if necessary, and persistence is extremely dangerous for anything relying on invisibility. That persistence changes the geometry of undersea warfare dramatically over time. During the Cold War, tracking submarines across huge ocean spaces continuously was extraordinarily difficult and resource-intensive. Autonomous systems may gradually reduce some of those limitations. Imagine networks of underwater drones quietly monitoring choke points, collecting acoustic signatures, and feeding information into AI-assisted processing systems 24 hours a day without interruption. No single drone solves submarine detection completely, but layered systems slowly reduce uncertainty, and reducing uncertainty threatens survivability. That is why future submarine doctrine increasingly revolves around defeating networks instead of simply avoiding individual ships or submarines. Cyber warfare, electronic deception, acoustic manipulation, autonomous decoys, and information disruption may become just as important as torpedoes in future undersea conflicts. The battlefield beneath the surface is evolving into a giant contest between distributed sensing systems and distributed stealth systems. Whoever adapts faster may shape the future balance of military power across entire oceans. And because ballistic missile submarines support nuclear deterrence directly, these developments influence not only naval warfare, but strategic stability itself. That is what makes autonomous undersea systems so important. They are not merely new tools. They are gradually reshaping the assumptions underpinning survivability in the nuclear age. China's submarine force has evolved rapidly during the last 2 decades because Beijing understands something fundamental about Pacific strategy. The United States historically depended heavily on uncontested maritime movement across the Pacific to project power, reinforce allies, and maintain regional dominance. Submarines threatened that freedom quietly and efficiently. Chinese planners watched how American naval superiority operated after the Cold War and concluded that directly matching the United States ship for ship would be extremely difficult and expensive. Instead, China pursued layered denial strategies aimed at complicating American operations close to contested regions. Submarines became central to that strategy because they create uncertainty beneath the surface while supporting broader anti-access systems above it. Modern Chinese submarine classes are significantly more advanced than earlier generations. They are quieter, more technologically sophisticated, and increasingly integrated into larger surveillance and missile architectures. China is also investing heavily in seabed infrastructure, maritime sensor systems, AI processing capabilities, and autonomous underwater technologies supporting future undersea operations. None of this guarantees Chinese undersea superiority today. American submarine forces remain extremely capable and experienced, but the acoustic gap that once heavily favored the United States is narrowing gradually. And narrowing gaps matter enormously inside deterrence planning, because survivability depends on maintaining advantages adversaries cannot confidently overcome. At the same time, Russia continues prioritizing strategic submarines heavily despite broader economic and military challenges. Russian ballistic missile submarines remain critical components of Moscow's nuclear deterrent posture. The Arctic especially matters because northern submarine routes provide strategic access to both the Atlantic and Pacific while offering environmental conditions favorable for concealment. Melting Arctic ice may transform those dynamics further over coming decades by opening new maritime pathways and increasing strategic competition across northern regions. Russia also continues investing in specialized undersea capabilities, including deep diving systems, seabed operations, autonomous underwater vehicles, and advanced torpedo technologies designed to complicate Western naval planning. Taken together, these developments reveal something important. The undersea domain is no longer an uncontested environment dominated comfortably by one power. It is becoming multipolar, technologically dense, and increasingly competitive. That reality forces every major naval power to adapt simultaneously. More sensors, more drones, more AI-assisted analysis, more distributed operations, more emphasis on survivability beneath persistent surveillance conditions. The oceans are slowly transforming from opaque hiding spaces into highly contested information environments. And the future balance of military power may depend heavily on who learns fastest how to operate inside that transformation without losing strategic stability entirely. One of the least discussed aspects of submarine warfare is how heavily it depends on psychology. Technology matters enormously, but perception often matters just as much. Deterrence itself is fundamentally psychological. Adversaries must believe submarines remain survivable. Commanders must trust communication systems. Crews must remain calm under uncertainty. Political leaders must avoid overreacting during ambiguous situations. Underwater environments naturally amplify ambiguity because information arrives slowly and imperfectly. Sonar contacts are rarely completely certain. Acoustic signatures can be misidentified. Environmental conditions distort detection constantly. During crises, military leaders may need to make decisions based on incomplete underwater pictures, while enormous strategic consequences hang in the balance. That psychological tension becomes especially dangerous once AI-assisted systems accelerate information processing dramatically. Faster data analysis may create pressure for faster human decisions during already stressful situations, and compressed decision timelines increase escalation risk significantly. This is why future undersea warfare may revolve increasingly around cognitive pressure rather than simple destruction. The side capable of creating confusion, uncertainty, and hesitation inside enemy decision cycles gains major strategic advantages. False acoustic signatures, autonomous decoys, cyber manipulation, targeting sensor networks, information overload generated by distributed underwater drones, AI-assisted deception operations. All of these tools aim ultimately at perception, because modern military systems become vulnerable once operators lose confidence in what they are seeing and hearing. The first sign a system is collapsing is often confusion rather than physical damage, and nowhere is confusion more dangerous than inside nuclear deterrent structures, depending on survivability assumptions. Ballistic missile submarines stabilize deterrence precisely because they create strategic certainty through tactical uncertainty. Adversaries cannot locate them confidently, so retaliation remains unavoidable. But if future technologies begin weakening that uncertainty, strategic stability becomes more fragile psychologically, long before missiles ever launch. This is why submarine warfare matters far beyond naval combat alone. It sits directly at the intersection of technology, psychology, deterrence, and global power balance. And beneath the silence of the oceans, all of those forces are evolving simultaneously. Military history repeatedly shows that dominant technologies rarely remain dominant forever. Battleships once seemed untouchable until aircraft transformed naval warfare. Fixed fortifications looked powerful until mobility and air power bypassed them. Even stealth aircraft now face increasingly sophisticated sensor networks. Submarines may eventually experience similar pressure if oceans continue becoming easier to monitor technologically. That possibility drives enormous investment into future stealth approaches right now. Quieter propulsion systems, improved acoustic masking, advanced hull materials, AI-assisted maneuvering routes, optimized around environmental conditions, distributed autonomous decoys. Cyber attacks against enemy sensor networks. Future submarine survivability may depend less on any single breakthrough and more on constantly adapting faster than detection systems evolve. The competition resembles an endless cycle between hiding and finding. Every improvement in surveillance triggers new investments in concealment. Every improvement in concealment triggers new investments in surveillance. Undersea warfare therefore evolves continuously because neither side can afford strategic complacency. This evolutionary pressure affects alliances too. American allies increasingly recognize they cannot rely solely on traditional assumptions about uncontested maritime security forever. Australia's pursuit of nuclear-powered submarines reflects this shift clearly. Japan's expanding anti-submarine capabilities reflect it too. India's growing submarine investments reflect concern about long-term strategic balance across the Indo Pacific. Smaller regional powers also study undersea warfare closely because submarines allow relatively limited fleets to create disproportionate strategic uncertainty. Hidden survivable systems can complicate enemy planning far beyond their numerical size. That principle has become increasingly attractive inside a world where visible concentration creates vulnerability under persistent surveillance conditions. And because submarine survivability influences nuclear deterrence directly for multiple powers, undersea warfare increasingly shapes global stability itself, rather than merely regional naval balance. The frightening reality is that humanity may now be entering a transitional era where old assumptions about ocean invisibility slowly weaken while no new stable doctrine fully replaces them yet. Strategic systems remain operational, but the technological environment surrounding them is changing rapidly beneath the surface. And history shows transitional eras are often the most dangerous periods, precisely because certainty begins eroding before new equilibrium forms. There is a reason submarine crews are selected and trained so carefully. Life underwater places unusual pressure on human psychology. Isolation, confinement, uncertainty, artificial lighting, repetitive routines, and constant awareness of strategic responsibility all combine into an environment few people experience anywhere else. Ballistic missile submarine crews may spend months disconnected from ordinary civilian life while carrying weapons capable of reshaping world history within minutes. Every technical system on board matters. Every acoustic signature matters. Every procedure matters. Unlike many military environments, there is almost no margin for carelessness underwater because errors compound rapidly inside sealed steel environments beneath crushing ocean pressure. Fires are catastrophic. Flooding is catastrophic. Mechanical failures can expose positions. Communication failures create strategic uncertainty. Yet, despite these pressures, crews must remain calm, methodical, and disciplined continuously because emotional instability itself becomes dangerous inside confined environments where everyone depends on each other completely. That human dimension often disappears from public conversations about deterrence because people focus primarily on weapons and technology. But deterrence is ultimately maintained by people operating systems under enormous responsibility. Submarine commanders make decisions based on incomplete information. Sonar operators interpret ambiguous signals. Engineers manage nuclear reactors beneath the ocean surface. Political leaders trust these crews to maintain stability through invisibility and restraint simultaneously. Future undersea warfare may become increasingly automated through AI-assisted systems and autonomous drones. But humans still remain central to escalation management because political judgment cannot be fully automated safely. The battlefield may become too fast for humans alone operationally, yet nuclear deterrence still depends on human caution strategically. That contradiction creates one of the most difficult balancing acts in modern military planning. Accelerate decision-making enough to survive technologically without accelerating escalation so fast that miscalculation becomes uncontrollable. And nowhere is that balancing act more delicate than beneath the surface, where visibility is limited, communication is constrained, and uncertainty shapes every layer of warfare simultaneously. Imagine a future crisis in the Pacific involving Taiwan, contested shipping routes, cyber attacks, and escalating military deployments across multiple domains simultaneously. Satellites monitor fleet movement constantly. AI systems analyze radar activity and communications patterns continuously. Autonomous drones patrol maritime regions, gathering intelligence in real time. Underwater sensor networks detect unusual acoustic anomalies near choke points. Ballistic missile submarines disappear into patrol areas, while attack submarines hunt each other beneath the surface silently. Political leaders receive fragmented information at incredible speed, while pressure mounts publicly and militarily. In that environment, survivability becomes more important than visibility. The side capable of preserving operational uncertainty gains strategic breathing room. The side becoming predictable grows vulnerable quickly. That is why submarines remain so important despite all technological advances elsewhere. They still complicate enemy calculations better than almost any other platform in existence. But future crises may also expose how fragile deterrence assumptions become once technology accelerates too quickly. What happens if AI-assisted systems falsely classify acoustic contacts? What happens if cyber attacks corrupt undersea sensor data during confrontation? What happens if autonomous underwater drones create accidental escalation incidents near strategic submarines? Undersea warfare already operates inside environments filled with ambiguity naturally. Adding increasingly autonomous technologies into that environment creates powerful opportunities alongside powerful risks. And because ballistic missile submarines support nuclear survivability directly, mistakes beneath the surface can influence global strategic stability far beyond local naval encounters. That is why military planners increasingly emphasize resilience, redundancy, and survivability, instead of simple offensive capability alone. Future undersea dominance may depend less on destroying enemy systems quickly and more on preserving confidence under chaotic conditions, because once confidence collapses, escalation pressure rises rapidly. The first sign a deterrence system is failing is not missiles launching. It is fear that retaliation may no longer survive reliably. The undersea domain has always rewarded patience. Submarine commanders think in hours, days, sometimes weeks, rather than seconds. Tracking operations may continue silently for extraordinary lengths of time without direct confrontation. Crews learn discipline through restraint because revealing position unnecessarily destroys survivability. But future warfare trends increasingly reward speed. Faster sensors, faster missiles, faster processing, faster targeting cycles. That tension between patience and acceleration sits at the center of modern military transformation. The battlefield is becoming increasingly compressed, while submarine warfare still depends heavily on caution, stealth, and delayed exposure. Balancing those opposing pressures may become one of the defining strategic challenges of future naval doctrine. This is where AI creates both opportunity and danger simultaneously. AI-assisted systems can process underwater information faster than humans, identify anomalies rapidly, and support tactical decisions under complex conditions. But faster information can also create pressure for faster escalation. Political leaders and commanders may feel compelled to react quickly before losing strategic advantage. During crises, compressed timelines increase the risk of misinterpretation dramatically. Undersea warfare already limits visibility and certainty naturally. Add cyber disruptions, autonomous drones, electronic deception, and AI-assisted targeting into the same environment, and strategic confusion can spread rapidly beneath the surface. That is why survivability remains more stabilizing than aggression in nuclear doctrine. Ballistic missile submarines reduce pressure for immediate reaction, precisely because they preserve second-strike confidence. As long as submarines survive, leaders have more time to think, more time to verify information, more time to avoid catastrophic mistakes. In many ways, hidden submarines quietly buy time for civilization itself during moments where panic could otherwise dominate decision-making. Modern warfare increasingly revolves around networks rather than individual platforms. Aircraft connect to satellites. Ships connect to sensor grids. Drones connect to AI-assisted targeting systems. Intelligence flows across enormous digital architectures continuously, but networks create dependency, and dependency creates vulnerability. Undersea warfare reflects this transformation clearly because submarines no longer operate completely alone. They depend on communication structures, intelligence fusion, navigation systems, environmental mapping, and broader maritime awareness networks, supporting survivability indirectly. Future conflicts may therefore involve intense competition, not only between submarines themselves, but between entire information ecosystems operating across oceans simultaneously. The real target may no longer be the submarine. It may be the network supporting its invisibility. That shift explains why cyber warfare increasingly intersects with naval doctrine. Disrupting sensor feeds, corrupting acoustic databases, interfering with communications, or poisoning AI-assisted analysis systems could influence undersea operations dramatically without firing a single torpedo. Information itself becomes terrain. The side capable of manipulating perception gains enormous leverage beneath the surface because submarine warfare depends heavily on uncertainty already. False contacts, deceptive signatures, disrupted communications, autonomous decoys. Everything becomes part of a broader struggle over situational awareness. And because submarines support nuclear deterrence directly, information warfare beneath the ocean carries extraordinary strategic consequences. The terrifying reality is that future undersea conflict may remain largely invisible to the public, even while profoundly affecting global stability. Financial systems, communications infrastructure, naval operations, and deterrence structures could all experience pressure simultaneously without dramatic visible battles announcing the shift clearly. That hidden nature makes submarine warfare uniquely dangerous because strategic instability can spread quietly beneath the surface long before ordinary civilians recognize the seriousness of what is changing. For decades, American military superiority relied heavily on the assumption that oceans favored the United States structurally. Geography protected the homeland, while powerful fleets projected force outward across maritime routes. But geography alone no longer guarantees security the way it once did. Long-range missiles compress distance. Cyber warfare ignores oceans entirely. Autonomous systems extend surveillance reach continuously. Submarines remain one of the few platforms still capable of restoring strategic uncertainty inside increasingly transparent environments. That is why undersea dominance matters so much now. It preserves unpredictability in a world becoming obsessed with total visibility. Yet, preserving unpredictability grows harder every year. AI systems improve acoustic classification. Sensor networks expand. Autonomous drones persist underwater longer. Rival submarine fleets become quieter. Data processing accelerates constantly. None of these developments eliminate submarine survivability completely today, but together they steadily pressure old assumptions about invisibility. Strategic planners understand this deeply. That is why future naval doctrine increasingly emphasizes distributed survivability across many systems instead of relying solely on concentrated visible power. Smaller platforms, autonomous systems, hidden networks, flexible deployment structures. Undersea warfare increasingly resembles an ecosystem rather than a collection of isolated vessels. And within that ecosystem, the most important strategic asset may not be raw firepower at all. It may be the ability to remain uncertain long enough to prevent escalation from becoming irreversible. During the Cold War, both superpowers feared surprise attack constantly. Radar systems scanned skies continuously. Submarines patrolled silently beneath oceans. Intelligence agencies searched obsessively for signs of strategic movement. Yet despite terrifying crises and enormous ideological hostility, nuclear war never happened directly between the United States and the Soviet Union. Many factors contributed to that outcome, but survivable deterrence played a critical role. Ballistic missile submarines helped stabilize escalation by ensuring retaliation remained unavoidable even after devastating attacks. That survivability reduced pressure for immediate preemptive action during crises. Leaders still feared conflict intensely, but they also understood catastrophic escalation could not guarantee victory. Submarines, therefore, became paradoxical instruments of restraint through destructive capability. The question now is whether future technology preserves or weakens that stabilizing effect. If submarines remain survivable despite evolving detection systems, deterrence may continue functioning relatively stably beneath changing technological conditions. But if oceans become dramatically more transparent over time, strategic calculations could shift dangerously. Leaders may feel pressure to strike earlier during crises before survivable assets disappear. Escalation timelines could compress sharply. Fear and uncertainty could dominate decision-making faster than during earlier eras. This is why the future of undersea warfare matters far beyond naval strategy alone. It directly influences the future stability of nuclear deterrence itself. And because these developments happen slowly beneath the surface through classified programs, sensor improvements, AI systems, and acoustic research, public awareness often lags far behind strategic reality. The silent race underwater may ultimately shape the future balance of global power more profoundly than many visible geopolitical confrontations happening above the surface today. Return again to the submarine disappearing from port at the beginning of this episode. Somewhere tonight, crews continue operating inside steel compartments beneath enormous ocean pressure, while entire governments rely on their invisibility for strategic stability. They move silently through darkness guided by navigation systems, sonar analysis, doctrine, training, and decades of accumulated undersea warfare experience. Around them, the ocean remains filled with competing forces, searching constantly. Satellites, patrol aircraft, sensor networks, autonomous drones, AI-assisted processing systems, rival submarines. The underwater battle space is becoming denser, smarter, and more contested every year. Yet the submarine still survives primarily through uncertainty. Nobody can fully guarantee where it is. Nobody can fully guarantee whether it has been tracked. And that uncertainty shapes military behavior across the planet, quietly every single day. That may ultimately be the defining truth about submarine warfare in the 21st century. The oceans are no longer empty barriers separating nations. They are active strategic terrain, filled with hidden systems, supporting deterrence, communications, logistics, surveillance, and global power projections simultaneously. Beneath the surface, nations compete constantly to preserve invisibility, while reducing invisibility for everyone else. It is a silent arms race, built around information, survivability, and perception more than spectacle. And the most powerful weapon inside that race may still be the one designed never to fire. Because as long as ballistic missile submarines remain survivable, nuclear deterrence retains a degree of stability through unavoidable retaliation. But if technology eventually strips away that invisibility, the strategic balance underpinning modern deterrence may begin changing in ways humanity has never fully experienced before. The future battlefield may not be dominated by whichever nation builds the biggest fleet or the largest number of missiles. It may belong to whichever nation best understands uncertainty. Future warfare increasingly rewards the ability to see without being seen, to process information without exposing intent, and to survive inside environments saturated with sensors. Submarines embody all of those principles simultaneously. They are not simply naval platforms. They are strategic instruments designed around hidden survivability. That is why every major power continues investing heavily into undersea warfare despite rising costs and extraordinary technical complexity. Hidden systems still matter enormously inside a world drifting steadily toward total surveillance. And that is why the undersea domain will likely remain one of the most important military frontiers of the coming decades. AI-driven sonar systems, autonomous underwater drones, seabed infrastructure, distributed sensor networks, quieter submarines, cyber warfare targeting maritime systems. All of these developments point toward oceans becoming increasingly contested information environments rather than empty geographic space. The competition beneath the surface is accelerating quietly, while public attention remains focused mostly elsewhere. But beneath all the silence, one strategic reality continues anchoring the system. Survivability prevents panic. Panic drives escalation. And ballistic missile submarines still preserve survivability better than almost any other military platform humanity has ever created. That hidden stability may be one of the last barriers preventing catastrophic miscalculation between nuclear powers in a rapidly changing technological age. At this very moment, somewhere beneath the Atlantic or Pacific Ocean, a submarine continues moving silently through darkness. No headlines track its route. No civilians watch its progress. Its exact position remains unknown to almost everyone on Earth. Inside the hull, sailors continue rotating watches while missiles remain secured inside launch tubes waiting for orders humanity hopes never arrive. Around them, the ocean absorbs sound and hides movement beneath layers of cold pressure and shifting currents. Above them, satellites scan endlessly, while rival intelligence agencies search for patterns hidden inside enormous oceans of data. Yet despite all the technology surrounding modern warfare, uncertainty still survives beneath the surface, and that uncertainty remains one of the most powerful strategic forces on Earth. Because the real weapon was never just the missile. It was the inability to know exactly where the missile was hiding. That invisibility shaped decades of nuclear deterrence doctrine. It shaped American naval supremacy. It shaped Cold War stability. And now, as China, Russia, and America race to dominate the undersea domain using AI, autonomous systems, advanced sonar, and distributed sensor networks, the future of that invisibility is becoming one of the most important military questions of the century. The battlefield is becoming too fast for humans alone. The oceans are becoming more transparent. The competition beneath the surface is accelerating silently, and the balance of power may increasingly belong to whichever nation best preserves uncertainty inside a world obsessed with total visibility. Next time, we go deeper into why America's allies are now building the same underwater deterrence capability, how the Pacific is transforming into the center of global submarine competition, and why the next great naval arms race may already be unfolding beneath the ocean surface where almost nobody can see it happening.